Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers about their careers in the ring and out of the ring, talking about acts of goodwill and community service and charity work and all that good stuff. And with me today is a very special guest. She's a former NWA Women's Champion. She's wrestled all over the country, all around the world. And she's currently a part of SHIMMER. And she's also got a charity that she's going to talk to us about today. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show, Lexie Fyfe. Welcome to the show,
Hi,
Lexie.
thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So tell me about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in New Jersey, and then ended up down in North Carolina. I went to college down there, and that's where I got into wrestling. And the rest is is history. I live in Florida now, though, so I've moved around a little bit.
Yeah, get to see a little bit of everything. But it's really nice where you are, relaxing.
It is. It really is. I live in a really nice part of Florida. We have a lot of woods and hiking and kayaking and manatees.
All
It's
the
a good
outdoor
place.
stuff.
Yeah.
Nice. So you mentioned earlier you got into wrestling when you went to North Carolina.
hmm
And what really got you hooked as far as...
Well, I mean, I've always loved wrestling, and I always watched. I watched it when I was really little, and I loved just the theatrics about it, and like I don't know, watching the Ultimate Warrior and all his colors and him shaking the ropes and stuff. And then I was really little, but I was young. And then I went to North Carolina, and I watched wrestling at college. With we'd get together and have little wrestling parties and WrestleMania parties, and I'd go to some of the WCW and WWF shows. And then I met a girl named Brandywine at a quote unquote real job that I had. And she was reading a wrestling magazine. And back in the 90s, there wasn't as many women who watched wrestling. And so I saw her reading this wrestling magazine in the break room, and I was like, another chick that likes wrestling. So I went up and talked to her, obviously. And she said, "Yeah, I've been doing some ballet work for a local, independent wrestling group, and I'm looking for a training partner." And I went, "Independent wrestling? What is that?" And she's like, "Oh, well, we do shows at like the National Guard armories and like county fairs and stuff like that." She goes, "But I'm not trained to be a wrestler. I just do like some ballet work. I get, grab the jackets. I, hit people over the head with things when my guy's not winning." And I was like, that sounds amazing. Tell me more. And so she was looking for a training partner. So she said there was a show at a National Guard armory not too far from where we lived. And I was like, this is perfect. Let me try this out. And I went and I got in the ring before the show and like got thrown around a little bit and was like, this is so much fun. This is what I'm supposed to do. So I started training, and I just kind of never looked back from there. I thought it would be just a weekend gig, like something fun to do occasionally. And, I started getting booked in different places, and then I started getting booked overseas. And then I started, going across the country, and I was like, ugh. So I quit my real job and I never went back.
So here's a funny story. I actually went to one of your shows like years ago. I was 10. It was a show at the fairgrounds in Nashville, and I think you were wrestling in a triple threat match, I think it was, for the women's championship.
Let's see. Was it what it might have been like? Was it like Christy Ritchie and Tasha Simone,
Yeah.
maybe?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Was it?
So,
It was for NWA then, I'm sure.
yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's so cool, getting to talk to you all these years later.
And you were only
Really,
10 though, huh? Okay.
yeah.
Well, that makes me feel bad.
No worries, I promise. But so okay, so the 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s like was a huge time for the business. I mean, you had the Hulk era, the Hulk Hogan era, the
Yeah.
Attitude Era, of course, with Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and up
Yeah.
until, even up to, the John Cena era, it was huge, it's still popular
Mhm.
today, obviously, but definitely like around that, late 90s was like a hotbed for pro wrestling. So
Oh yeah, we stayed so busy on the independent. Like I said, I didn't even know there was such a thing as independent wrestling. All I
mhm.
knew was WCW, WWF back then. And then, like ECW was just starting. They weren't like, they hadn't really made a name yet. They were just kind of
Right.
like, you were hearing little bits and pieces
Yeah.
here and there. There was no internet back then. I mean, there was, but not like, I mean,
Wasn't as
people
prevalent
had
as it
some
is now.
computers, but we didn't have the World Wide Web like we do now, where you can
Right.
just get all the information instantly. So you didn't know about these shows unless you happened to glance up and see a poster somewhere. So
Right.
when I started training and then started getting booked, I realized that, like basically any National Guard armory in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia, I probably could still tell you where they are, because like we hit them all, and we hit all the county fairs and all the state fairs, and like, so I stayed busy. Like I was only home a couple days a week here and there. It was almost like, working for WWE and doing all the house shows. So you only come home on like Wednesday, Thursday. It was,
Yeah.
that's how busy we were able to stay. I broke it in 1995 and I started wrestling at the end of that year. And so like, 96 through like 99, like were like, it was wonderful to be an independent wrestler back then. I mean, we had shows all the time. You had your pick of shows.
No doubt. And so one of the camps that you went to while you were training was the Omega camp.
Yeah.
And you got to rub shoulders with the Hardys a couple of times, and a lot of people came from that camp that went on to be big stars. The Hardys, Shannon Moore, Gregory Helms, just to name a few people. I mean, that had to have been a fun experience.
Yeah, it was. It's funny. I've told this story before, but I was kind of. I want to put this nicely. I wasn't. I didn't feel like I was progressing at the school that Brandywine and I were at. He didn't like us to wrestle with the men at the time, because they kept it really apart. And I was like, well, if I don't wrestle with these other people who know what they're doing, it's harder for me to get better. And I went to a show. It was in North Carolina, and Matt and Jeff Hardy were on it, and a few other people that you just named. And Matt was like, after my match, it was a baseball show. It was like we had a show, like it was like a double header, and so they had a wrestling show in between the two games.
Yeah.
And so where our locker room was far away from where the matches were being held, so we weren't able to watch each other's matches. So when I got driven back on the golf cart back to the locker room area, Matt was like, "Hey, how'd your match go?" And I was like, "Oh, terrible. I don't even know if I should be doing this. I don't feel like I'm getting any better. I just feel like I'm staying the same, and I want to progress, and I don't like feeling like this." And he was like, "Well, we get together like every weekend, usually on Sundays, and train at my friend's house and down in Cameron, and so like." It wasn't that far. It was like an hour and a half for me. So I was like, well, can I come? you know? So I went down there, and they beat the ever living crap out of me. They just hit hard, and they gave me a lot of big bumps and stuff like that. Nothing dangerous. I didn't come away with black eyes or anything like that.
Yeah. It was like they were working stiff.
But yeah, they treated me like every other wrestler. They didn't treat me differently because I was a girl, that type of thing. And then we sat around and watched the pay-per-view that night. That was like their thing, or so it was a Sunday night. And I was listening to Matt dissect the matches. Like he'd be like, "Oh, so and so did that there, and I really like that because it led to this." And then he went, "Well, I would probably have done that a little different." And I was just like, "Wait, what? What is this?" Like it just opened my eyes to like the whole storytelling part of wrestling that it hadn't been talked to about that to me before. And I was like, "Oh, so like if I do this and that and the other, and then the crowd's going to react like this." And then it just made sense to me. And so I blame Matt Hardy for me still being in wrestling and feeling like this nowadays. So I kept going back, and I would come back every week that they because they weren't signed to WWE yet. So every Sunday we were out there in this crappy ring in the middle of nowhere in somebody's backyard. Like, I mean, it sounds like we're a bunch of backyard wrestlers, which it's funny. I mean, the ring the ring went like this. Like, I mean, it was warped. There was no padding anywhere. It was ridiculous, and I loved every minute of it, because just listening to his brain work was amazing. And and I learned more in the little time that I had with them before they got signed and went off than I did in the first 2 years of my training. So
They definitely, both of them have great wrestling minds. They know what works and
yeah.
what doesn't work. And look at them. They've multiple time tag team champions. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
can't get anybody else, any better to learn from legends like them, the Hardy Boys.
At the very least, I don't know anybody in our little group that at least didn't go on to be like, you know, jobbers. You know what I mean? Like show
Right.
up and put somebody over type people.
Oh yeah.
Not all of us had contracts, but all of us worked for at least some of the big companies at some point in time. It was just an amazing group of wrestlers.
No doubt. No doubt about it. Who are some of the people like over the course of your career that you've enjoyed working with?
I mean, some of the ones that I really enjoyed the most are ones that might not be even well known, like Mighty Heidi, who lived in Tennessee. I had some phenomenal matches with her, and we just like clicked in the ring. Like we just really could feed off of each other well. Brandywine, obviously, my original training partner, we went on to have some really good feuds. Um, Leilani Kai, oh my
Mm,
gosh, I can't say enough for Leilani Kai because um,
another
I'd only
icon.
been in the business for a very short time, and I was blessed to be put in a program against her, and it was um, she was I don't even I don't have the words. Can you tell I'm stuttering?
Yeah.
Just the amount of just like learning from her in the ring, like I was just like, she is amazing. She can make everybody look like $1 million, and her hits look like they're taking your head off. And I mean, there was just so much, and this is like when she was like past her prime, but she wasn't,
Yeah.
and then I got to go on an overseas tour with Wendy Richter. That was amazing. We were on tour together for 30 days. We did 16 different shows. Like I can't go. I can go on about how much I learned from her too. Just the way she could get the crowd to react the way she wanted and everything was just amazing. Even then, like she had been kind of out of the business for a while. She got called out of basic retirement to go on this tour, and I was like, I got picked. Oh, I'd only been in the business like 4 years. I was such a newbie, and I was going on tour with Wendy Richter, you know. So there's been so many. I've got so many awesome wrestling family now. It's ridiculous, and I'm blessed to step in the ring with even the ones that weren't really good. I learned from because I learned how to cover mistakes or whatever. So it's everybody I've been in the ring with has been a blessing in some way or another.
I also wanted to touch on something. I saw that you had a long time friendship with the wrestler Daffney, the late wrestler Daffney, who passed
Yeah.
away last year. Tell me about your relationship with her.
She was my sister from another mister. Like, we were um this is the hard one for me to talk about because I still cry a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she suffered from mental illness. She had bipolar disorder, and she was an alcoholic, and all of that is online, so I'm not speaking out of
Mm-hmm.
turn. And she suffered from a good many years and tried so many different things, and they had a lot of trouble trying to get her medication regulated. I'm not sure what you know about bipolar disorder, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to keep tweaking that medicine, and sometimes it doesn't work. And unfortunately with her, um like I have a friend who's bipolar, and she suffers on the manic side, and that's terrible in itself, but it's a little bit better. Daphne always skewed to the depressed self, the depressed side of it, and over the last year or so of her life, she was living up in the Atlanta area, and I could tell she was getting more and more just depressed, like she didn't want to live there. And her friends and I were trying to talk her into either moving out to where her family, her dad and her brother lived, or moving back out down here to Florida where she had all of us, like our support system. And unfortunately, she got to that point where her brain was lying to her, and she decided to take her own life. And it's it's been a really hard year. We're just over the year. September 1st was a year. And, we still cry about it a lot. We try to do, a lot of us check in on each other a lot more. We do stuff like that. My daughter's blowing me kisses because she knows I'm upset. Thank you, honey. Um, so I want to tell everybody, speaking of that, like, if you're feeling down, you're feeling alone, remember your brain lies to you when you suffer, especially with like bipolar disorder and depression. Sometimes your medication lies to you because you're not on the right one, or your doctor's not, helping you enough. As a country, we don't do, as in the world, period, but as a country especially, we don't do enough to help those that suffer from mental illnesses. And we need to have more awareness of that and take the stigma away, because people are afraid to talk about it when,
Right.
when they're depressed, or if they're having, these dark feelings. Like, and our system fails us in a lot of ways, because I know when I was talking to Daffney, especially over the last couple months, if she mentioned the word suicide, like, her therapist is automatically supposed to call, and have
Yeah.
her admitted. Well, she just wants to talk about suicidal feelings. She's not like, and so like there's the trigger words and stuff like that. We have to like just work on, um, I'm not being very eloquent with my words right now because I
No,
am a
it's
little
okay. It's
upset.
okay.
It's
It's all
a
right.
hard subject. So, but we have to work on like our system and how we deal with, people that suffer from mental illnesses, and, take away some of those things. Like, it took me a little while to tell people, like, when people talk about Daphne, I'm like, I have to say the word, she committed suicide. Like, it was hard for me to say that, or
Oh,
she took
sure.
her own life. Like, and I do like to say stuff like, she lost her battle with her mental illness, because it is an illness. It's like anything else.
Mm-hmm.
If you have diabetes, you're going to take a shot for insulin. If you have a mental illness, you have to take medication for it. It shouldn't be a quiet thing, a hush hush thing. I'm
Right.
embarrassed.
Absolutely.
It's just an illness like everybody else can have. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I miss her.
I do too. I think I can speak for a lot of wrestling fans who miss her as well. You're now working on a charity of your own, right? Called Jar of Hope. Tell
Well,
me
it's
about
not
that.
my charity. It's a charity that I become involved with.
Okay.
Yeah. So Jar of Hope. It's a charity that was started by a father of a young boy who has Duchenne MS. So it's a form of multiple sclerosis that affects children.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it is a terminal illness. And, most of them don't live into adulthood. Or if they do, it's in a very, just a few of them do.
Mm-hmm.
It works just like MS does, but faster. So his son went from, being 4 years old and walking around, and they noticed some differences, and so they brought him to get some tests. But he was walking, talking, able, fully mobile, type of thing, but
Mm-hmm.
having just some issues. And so now, he's wheelchair bound, and he's doing well, considering, because they've got him on some protocols that they're working on, like experimental stuff, really, because it's,
Mm-hmm.
it's terminal. So why not
Yeah.
try stuff? But they have this trial that they want to do, and the University of Florida down here in Tallahassee has offered to run the trial, but they need the funding. And unfortunately, it's considered a rare disease. So like only 20,000 people in the world have been diagnosed with this. And so the funding is not there. It's not like some of the other cancers and some of the other diseases that get a lot of funding because millions and millions of people have it or could have it. It's considered a rare disease. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, it might be a rare disease, but those 20,000 people who have already been diagnosed with it, and people who are who are being born that will have it, they're going to die if we don't do anything about this. I
Mm-hmm.
hate, and I mean, and that's the bald truth of it.
Sure.
So, so I met James Raffone I'm a runner now. So, I went from like extreme wrestling, beating up my body, to like doing extreme ultra marathon crazy stuff.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I met James Raffone out in 2019 at the Grand Ultra, which is this race that is run out in Arizona, Utah, through the deserts, up through these mountains. It's crazy. It's 180, almost 180 miles of craziness. And I went from Florida where, you know, you walk outside and you sweat, to going there and going, I can't breathe. It's so dry. But anyways, I met him out there because when his son was diagnosed, he sold his construction business, started Jar of Hope, and said, I'm going to do all that I can to hopefully find a cure for my son. But if I can't do that, find a cure for those who come after him. And so he does like these extreme sports and running events and things like that. So to raise awareness for Jar of Hope, and, you know, to hopefully raise the money so that they can run this big trial and hopefully save lives. And I was really intrigued by his story. But then COVID hit and, like, you know, we weren't doing anything and everything. So then I went back to the G2G again this year, just recently, in September. And he was there again with his group. They run it like every year. And so we sat down and had some more conversations about it. And I really wanted to become involved. So I do a lot of Disney races. I'm a Disney fanatic. I love Disney, all things Disney. And they have races there. They, you know, so I did my first marathon was a Disney marathon. And then I've done this challenge called the Dopey Challenge, which is where you run a 5K on Thursday, a 10K on Friday, a half marathon, so 13 miles, 13.1 miles on Saturday, and then a full marathon, 26.2 miles on Sunday. I've done that like 4 times already. So this will be my 5th time doing it. And I decided to do it for Jar of Hope. My daughter is running the 5K and the 10K with me. She's still too young to do the other ones, but she's a runner too. And Kimberly is also running the Dopey Challenge, and she's doing it for Jar of Hope too. So we will be out there in our Disney costumes, wearing our Jar of Hope patches and our Jar of Hope flag, and we're trying to raise money. So I'm trying to raise $2,000 as part of my thing for them. And then, so is Kimberly. And then I've got to raise $900 for my daughter to run the 2 races. That's kind of like the deal we made with them. And then just get the word out.
Hey, Lexie, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on here. It really means a lot to me and to the listeners that are watching and listening to the podcast. Where can people find you on social media to know more about you and any upcoming shows you have? Or
pretty much all my social media is at Slammin' Ladies. That's Slammin' with no G, SLAMMINLADIES. It'll, you know, that's where like my Twitter and my Insta and my Facebook are. Yeah, you know, check it out. I do funny little skits on Insta now. I've gotten into this, like, Kira Hogan's like, you got to do reels. You got to do reels. I'm like, all right, girl, do some reels. You know, so
yeah,
have fun with it. It's silly. It's stupid. Sometimes I feel so, but then I have fun with it. I'm like, oh, if it'll make, that's another thing. If it'll make somebody laugh, I'm for it. The Jar of Hope link is up. If anybody wants to donate, click that link.
Definitely. Well, again, thank you again for coming on the show, and you're more than welcome to come back anytime. And thank you again.
Thanks. I definitely will. I had a good time talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Take care. This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.